So yeah, today we're going to be talking about scoping a WCAG audit. I'm going to talk to you about some kind of like practical methods for scoping. After this presentation, we can also share there is a W3C like methodology document that has a very official and pretty heady approach to scoping for website assessment specifically. But I'm going to talk about sort of practical strategies for scoping audits for both websites and applications, and some sort of high-level things you can be thinking about to help make the process more efficient. So because automated tools alone can only capture a percentage of WCAG success criteria, manual auditing is required to ensure full conformance. Manual auditing involves assessing a web page or screen against WCAG success criteria, and our manual audit process internally includes approximately 88 manual tests in addition to 67 automated tests per screen. Usually the first question that comes up when we start talking about, auditing a website or application is what needs to be audited exactly? And scoping a CAG audit can feel pretty daunting at first, especially if you are trying to assess a larger website or product suite, especially if you've got a lot of legacy content. The goal of this presentation is to kind of help clarify the process, to give you some meaningful strategies to make scoping your digital assets and auditing an approachable process that you can begin tackling internally, or with the support of a third party. So I'm going to talk about defining project objectives, inventorying and mapping your digital properties, defining a representative sample, and strategies for prioritizing and phasing your approach. Let's see. So before diving into an audit, it's crucial that you understand why you're conducting it. Are you auditing for legal compliance? Do you have hard conformance requirements via the ADA, AODA, the EAA, Section 508 specifically, which is a part of the ADA? Or are you trying to meet internal accessibility initiatives and improve the user experience? Or is it a mix of both, which is usually the case with our clients? You'll need to determine which WCAG level you're aiming for. So we typically recommend auditing for WCAG 2.2 AA, which is the most up-to-date version of the rule set, and AA is the level required by most regulations. Single A level is basic accessibility, but it typically won't get you to a place of full conformance, since I mentioned, they do require AA in most regulations. And then AAA, which is, a question that comes up a lot as well, is actually typically a little bit more aspirational because it's not usually feasible for most organizations to conform with all AAA success criteria. If you serve specific populations of users, you may want to consider implementing some AAA guidelines where feasible and beneficial for your users. Accessibility isn't one size fits all. You want to identify your key user groups, including those with disabilities, and consider how different user roles interact with your platform. So for example, you might have students versus administrators on an education website, or you might have partners versus customers on a B2C or a B2B website. Those are all kind of important to think about in this initial planning stage. At the same time, we also want to acknowledge organizational constraints. So do you have budgetary limits? And are there limits on the available resources that can help with this project? What is your development bandwidth? And are there specific timelines that you need to meet? Finally, you want to ensure that your audit goals align with those business priorities and user needs. So there's a bit of a balancing act sometimes. For example, an e-commerce website might have to prioritize accessibility for the checkout process initially, or university may, due to organizational constraints, have to focus on student portals. We will talk more about prioritization as I get into this. Obviously, the end goal is to make everything accessible for all of your users, but we want to work up to that if necessary. So the first step here is, to inventory and map your digital assets. A thorough understanding of your products and websites is really important. Even if not all digital assets are in scope initially, you want to be cognizant of them and include them in your longer-term accessibility plan. How many websites do you have? Is there a primary website and then kind of secondary domains like a career site? Do you have web applications? Is there a mobile version as well, like iOS and Android? All of that is something to be thinking about because usually like the web app will need to be audited separately from the iOS app and the Android app, as they are on, different platforms with different native accessibility features. Additionally, like how are your digital assets organized and who do they serve? So as you're mapping these out, you want to be thinking about, how they're organized, how they interact, like is there overlap on the screens and functionality, and then who is using each of these. An understanding of which websites, web pages, and applications are most trafficked can be really helpful for prioritization later on as you're figuring out how to approach and phase this out. A well-scoped audit avoids unnecessary work and redundancy, which is why you want to establish clear scope boundaries as well. So be clear about what is in scope. Is it your core website, your mobile apps? Do you want to cover the authenticated user flows? And then what's out of scope? Maybe you have internal dashboards, rarely used legacy features, or features that you plan to sunset soon. And then additionally, are there third-party elements? If it's really third-party and you don't have any control over it, you may want to reach out to that vendor instead of auditing it yourself and see if they have a VPAT, see if they've done an audit on their application or feature there. And that might be, a real cost saver for you and not wasting your time auditing something you can't control. Now we're going to look at a few strategies for scoping and tailoring your approach to establishing a representative sample for your audit. So depending on how your website or application is structured, the approach you take might vary slightly. When applicable, inventorying and auditing your core component library or base templates is one of the most efficient ways to assess accessibility across your website and application. Obviously, if all the components used across your application live in a common component library, that's a really easy way to say we can tackle all of this and make sure that every component that we're using across the site or application is accessible without having to dig into individual pages and picking ones that have most of those components. And then the other case that this might come into play is if you are an agency or enterprise that builds multiple sites on a common base theme or base templates. In that case, we would recommend auditing a vanilla version of the base theme or base templates so that you know that what you're building on is accessible out of the box. Next, you want to understand and explore those crucial user journeys. This comes into play, especially when we talk about prioritization, but keeping key user journeys in mind when establishing a representative sample can really help you think about, what we should tackle first. This will also help you ensure you aren't missing important steps in the user journey and aid in refining the scope later on. If there aren't clear page templates or a common component library, which I know is the case in most, if not all situations, where you're trying to figure out how to scope this and it's a bit more of a challenge, we move to identifying representative templates, unique pages, features, and modals. You'll want to focus on unique screens, distinct page types that represent the design and functionality across your digital property to avoid redundant evaluations. It can also make sense to start thinking about different categories of pages that exist across the site, like the homepage, product pages, blog pages, forms, and we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide here. So now we actually want to define that representative sample. As mentioned, to ensure an efficient approach to the audit, you want to focus on unique page templates and screens. There's a lot of questions about what that means. In a lot of cases, this could look like the homepage, global navigation, product or service pages, a product categories page, forms, and then dynamic content like pop-ups or modal windows. The goal is to establish a representative sample with diverse code coverage. And the intent is to assess as much of the unique features and functionality of your application or website in, the least number of unique screens, essentially. When choosing pages to include in scope, we recommend choosing the most complex version of a given page type. This might be a product page with all possible product specification options over a simple product page. So, if some product pages have the option to select color, select a size, choose, customizations, add text to it, you'd want to select the most complex version of that with all of those customizations in play. The goal is to reduce redundancies and to audit unique functionality efficiently. Yeah. And then, I did mention the user journey, but you also want to think about user journey coverage. So if you're on an e-commerce site, making sure that you're covering all of the templates in the unique buyer journey there. And now we get into prioritizing and phasing this out. So remember that the best approach to accessibility is one that is sustainable and organizationally manageable. Improving accessibility is a journey. It is not just a final destination. So any steps your organization can take to, begin auditing and remediating your digital assets is a step in the right direction. Start small if you have to here. Some strategies for prioritization that can be employed when scoping and planning out your audit include starting with high traffic and core user-facing content. So you might want to focus on the highest traffic pages and primary user flows while also considering, legal exposure, project objectives. So do you have a specific, request or requirements in an RFP or from a client? And other, risk factors. So making sure that there is an accessibility statement and that your accessibility page is accessible and that a user who comes to that page looking for help can reach out to you successfully and get reasonable accommodations. Ultimately, it is your audit. So even if you can only start with a small subset of unique features and pages, do start there. And we are happy to help you with this. We take a very flexible approach to if we're helping you actually do the audit, scoping out projects along these lines. So when organizational restraints require you to prioritize and phase your approach to auditing, we often suggest assessing key user journeys first. The long-term goal is to make sure that every corner of your website or application is fully accessible to all users. Obviously, that is what we would like to see, but we understand that it isn't always feasible to tackle that all at one time and to audit every single unique page and feature, especially when we're dealing with these older legacy applications with, features on top of features built out. When this is the case, you might want to identify essential workflows or user journeys, such as like the login, checkout, purchasing flows, form submissions, and other critical functionalities so that you can prioritize them for assessment first. This can help you verify accessibility in crucial user interactions, including those that are more likely to impact users with disabilities, like that, accessibility get help page that I mentioned. Obviously, if you're trying to encourage your users to reach out for assistance if they encounter a barrier, you don't want there to be barriers getting to your accessibility page and submitting that form. And then the other thing to think about here is that you can take the lessons learned from a more focused audit and begin applying it more broadly across your platform and products. So as we, if we deliver audit results or if you're using our tools, there's a lot of resources and learning opportunities built into that. So we really try to help you understand why something is a WCAG failure and how you can build it better next time and fix those issues moving forward. So sometimes, a focused audit can result in improvements more broadly across the platform, even if only a small subset of pages have been actually audited in the first round. And then, as I'm talking about rounds of auditing, another common strategy is to phase the implementation of audits for efficiency and to work within your organizational resources. You can conduct audits in stages. We'd recommend starting with the core products and highest impact pages or functions first, and then expanding outwards as your resources allow. This may look like starting with the web app before the mobile versions, or the student experience before an admin dashboard. Finally, it is important to plan for continuous monitoring, which can usually be done with a tool like RAMP, and for reevaluation. So as we're talking about phasing things out, tracking changes to the products that have already been audited, to the products and features that have already been audited, is really important because it can help you maintain a clear picture of where you stand in terms of WCAG conformance, what has been assessed, what has not, and then what might need to be assessed in the future, as well as if those features that have already been audited have changed. So when working with accessible web, for example, if you do an audit on, a specific user flow, and that user flow doesn't have any major changes, but you want to add in an additional flow 6 months from now, if we're able to, document and clearly track that nothing has changed in the previously audited content, we can add on that additional user flow, which reduces the cost of those future engagements and allows you to work towards building out a more comprehensive picture of accessibility conformance, or a VPAT, if that is something that you are getting put together as a deliverable of the audit. Yeah, so that is, one of the key benefits of tracking change as you do this. Let's see. And then I know I've touched on this throughout the presentation, but Accessible Web obviously does audits. We also build tools that help you do audits internally, though. So if you want assistance with, expert support while auditing yourself, or to have our team audit, we offer those services. And then we will also drop in the chat a discount code for our platform RAMP. So RAMP is kind of the core of our hub of software tools, and it not only allows you to implement automatic monitoring and scanning after your audit is done, which is really helpful in maintaining accessibility and not letting those automatically detectable errors pile up after an audit, because usually the automatically detectable errors tend to be things that are more content based, so like adding images without alt text and stuff along those lines that may happen over time as blog posts are added. It also includes a guide manual audit tool. So you can actually, dive into auditing. It guides you through step by step each one of those 88 unique manual tests with resources to help you learn how to do it. So we're going to pop over to discussion time now. If you have any